The United States is currently grappling with a staggering $37 trillion in debt, which surpasses any national debt recorded throughout history. This amount even exceeds what the entire global economy produced in a single year just 20 years ago. What many people don't realize is that there's no intention to pay this off in the traditional sense. Instead, the plan is to eliminate it entirely, but not through default, austerity measures, or increased taxation. The strategy involves a calculated devaluation of the dollar, which essentially strips away purchasing power from everyone holding dollars, and this happens almost invisibly. The tools for this maneuver are often mistaken as unrelated to the government, cryptocurrencies and gold. What we're witnessing is the U.S. executing a sophisticated method to eliminate its debt. And they're creating an alternate financial system by accumulating significant reserves in Bitcoin and gold, poised to revalue these assets at prices far beyond their current worth to manage a debt that cannot realistically be repaid. Here's where it gets alarming. As the values of gold and cryptocurrencies increase, the dollar's value will decline. This means that every dollar you possess will lose purchasing power, bonds may become worthless, and savings accounts could diminish significantly in real terms. Essentially, you could be facing a legal subdued theft of your wealth, and many might not even recognize it until it's too late. In an upcoming video, I will break down the mechanics of this process, and not just theories or guesswork, but the real functioning methods of debt devaluation via strategic reserve revaluation. I'll provide historical context to show that this isn't unprecedented and outline what the U.S. government is doing right now. Executive orders, Bitcoin accumulation, gold reserves, and what you should know about the timeline of these changes. Because this isn't some distant threat, it's unfolding in the here and now. The pieces are being put into place, and once the plan is activated, there's no turning back. Let's clarify something critical. Government debt operates differently than personal or household debt. When you owe money, you must pay it back with tangible value, working more hours, selling assets, or cutting your spending. However, governments possess a unique advantage. They control the currency. This control allows them to alter the financial playing field. They can redefine the value of a dollar, adjust what their assets are worth on paper, and make debt vanish without actual repayment. This phenomenon is termed a monetary reset, which has occurred repeatedly throughout history. For instance, in 1933, faced with high debt from World War I and the Great Depression, the U.S. had a debt to GDP ratio of 40% and was in the midst of an economic crisis. President Franklin Roosevelt undertook a drastic measure. He revalued gold by an astounding 69% overnight. To give you a sense of scale, gold was officially valued at $2,067 per ounce that year. That was the landscape back in 1879, and it stayed that way for 54 years. 1 ounce of gold was pegged at $2,067, with the dollar being defined as 1/120th of an ounce of gold. This was known as the gold standard, meaning your dollar was effectively a promise for physical gold. However, the government found itself in financial trouble, unable to meet its obligations at that gold price. In response, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, making it illegal for Americans to possess gold. Citizens had to surrender their gold, receiving $20.67 per ounce, the official rate at that time. Most people went along with it, exchanging their gold for dollars. After the gold was collected, Roosevelt adjusted the price in 1934 to an astonishing $35 per ounce, a 69% increase overnight. Here's the impact of that decision. The U.S. government now held the majority of the nation's gold, transformed from a situation where their gold was worth around $4 billion at the old rate to a staggering $6.8 billion at the new rate. They essentially created $2.8 billion in value overnight just by adjusting the price. Here's the twist. The debts incurred were in dollars, which had now diminished in value compared to gold. Pre-revaluation, the government's debt represented 40% of GDP. But following the adjustment and the ensuing inflation, That burden was reduced to just 25% of GDP within 5 years. They managed to eliminate 15 percentage points of debt to GDP simply by revaluing gold and devaluing the dollar. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans holding dollars saw their purchasing power drop by 40% over the next decade due to the resulting inflation. The government effectively shifted wealth from dollar holders to itself to manage its debts. Those who had turned in their gold at $20.67 watched as it was revalued to $35, but had no means to buy it back, as it was now illegal for them. They were left with devalued dollars while the government used their confiscated gold to reduce its debts. This isn't just something from the past. This scenario is playing out again today. The current U.S. debt stands at $37 trillion with a debt to GDP ratio of 132%, the highest since World War II. The annual interest payments on this debt, a staggering $1.2 trillion, outpacing even the defense budget and Medicare, second only to Social Security. If interest rates remain at 5%, these payments could rise to $1.8 trillion annually by 2027, 6% of GDP, purely for interest, not including the principal. This situation is simply not sustainable, and it's a reality everyone is aware of. The Congressional Budget Office, the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve all see it. They've done the math. There's no way to pay this debt back through conventional methods. You can't tax your way out of a 132% debt to GDP ratio. You can't grow out of it when the debt is increasing faster than the economy. And cutting spending enough is unfeasible when interest alone consumes such a large portion of GDP. There's really only one outcome on the table: devaluation. But here's the hitch. If they simply start printing money to settle the debt, it'll be obvious to everyone. Inflation will surge, the dollar will crash, and public confidence will evaporate. They need to employ a more refined approach, something that appears to be legitimate policy rather than outright theft. Enter Bitcoin and gold. Let me break down what's unfolding right now. On January 23rd, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. This order compels the Treasury to acquire and hold Bitcoin as a strategic asset, much like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but tailored for digital currency. The official story is that this positions America at the forefront of digital assets, ensuring the U.S. keeps pace with China and other nations in crypto advancement and safeguards American innovation. But here's the underlying truth. The U.S. government currently possesses about 210,000 Bitcoin, which has been seized from various criminal activities like Silk Road, Bitfinex, and multiple ransomware cases, with Bitcoin currently valued at around $100,000 each. That amounts to roughly $21 billion. While it's a substantial sum, it hardly makes a dent in a $37 trillion debt crisis. However, this executive order isn't solely about holding the existing Bitcoin. It also calls for acquiring more. The proposed target in the bill, put forth by Senator Cynthia Lummis, is to amass 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years, amounting to about $100 billion at current prices. Here's the kicker. They're not planning on buying Bitcoin at market value. That would drive the price up and be too costly. Instead, they're acquiring it through other avenues, seizing it from ongoing criminal investigations, accepting it as fines from crypto companies, and possibly even mining it using government-owned energy. They're doing all of this quietly because their aim isn't to buy Bitcoin at its current price. It's to stockpile it before a potential revaluation. Let's consider how the revaluation could play out. Right now, Bitcoin is priced at around $100,000. Imagine if the U.S. manages to acquire 1 million Bitcoin over the next 3 years, averaging $120,000 each. That would total $120 billion in acquisition costs. Now, if they keep this under wraps, no big announcements or market buys, just accumulating through seizures, fines, and strategic purchases via intermediaries, by 2028, they might hold 1 million Bitcoin without the market knowing their true stake. Then they announce it. The U.S. Strategic Bitcoin Reserve is now operational. We hold 1 million Bitcoin and we're revaluing it, but instead of pegging it at the current market rate of $100,000, they decide on a revaluation price of $1 million per coin, a tenfold increase overnight. What impact would this have? Their acquisition of 1 million Bitcoin for $120 billion has now escalated to an astonishing $1 trillion on the government's balance sheet. This marks an impressive creation of $880 billion in value through a mere adjustment in accounting practices. However, this isn't solely about numbers on paper. When the U.S. government asserts that Bitcoin is worth $1 million per coin for its reserves, the market is likely to react. Why does this happen? Because the U.S. government holds the largest Bitcoin reserve, essentially setting a floor value. If the Treasury declares Bitcoin's worth at $1 million backed by the full confidence of the United States, the market adjusts accordingly. While Bitcoin won't surge to $1 million instantly, it might climb to $300,000, then $500,000, and $800,000 within a year, moving close to the official revaluation and supporting the numbers on the government's balance sheet. Now, here's a crucial aspect. As Bitcoin approaches this lofty price, what is happening to the dollar? It's in free fall. When a digital asset with no underlying value is suddenly valued at $1 million, it signifies that the dollar is losing significant value. The upward revaluation of Bitcoin inherently indicates a downward devaluation of the dollar. These two occurrences are fundamentally interconnected, viewed from contrasting perspectives. Let's examine the gold aspect. As Bitcoin alone won't be sufficient, the U.S. must adopt a dual strategy: Bitcoin for the future and gold for the past. The U.S. government currently holds 8,133 tons of gold, equivalent to about 261 million ounces, at today's market price of approximately $2,800 per ounce. That total stands at around $731 billion. While this amount appears substantial, it hardly makes a dent against a staggering $37 trillion debt. However, here's the twist. This gold is recorded on government books at just $422 per ounce. Not at the $2,800 market price, but at a 1973 statutory price of $422. Therefore, on official records, the U.S. gold reserve is valued at $11 billion instead of $731 billion. This discrepancy is astonishing. They possess an asset worth $731 billion, yet value it at a mere $11 billion. Why this gap? It allows room for a strategic revaluation. So, what happens when they decide to reevaluate? Suppose the U.S. announces a new gold valuation, higher than current market prices. They might declare that for purposes of U.S. strategic reserves and debt backing, gold will be valued at $20,000 per ounce. Why $20,000? Because that figure makes the calculations beneficial. At this new valuation, the U.S. gold reserves would climb to a staggering $5.2 trillion, up from the $11 billion on their books. They've effectively created $5.2 trillion in balance sheet value through this adjustment. Now, when we combine this with Bitcoin, 1 million Bitcoin at $1 million each gives us $1 trillion, and 261 million ounces of gold at $20,000 per ounce equates to $5.2 trillion. Hence, the total new balance sheet value from these revaluations is an impressive $6.2 trillion. This signifies $6.2 trillion in assets that could technically help offset the national debt, not erase it, but improve the balance sheet's appearance, enhance the debt to GDP ratio, and portray the government as more financially stable. Let's talk about the real game changer. When gold is officially revalued to an astonishing $20,000 an ounce, you can bet the market price will adjust accordingly. If the biggest gold holder in the world declares gold is worth this much and backs it up with solid policy, the market will take note. We won't see gold hit that $20,000 mark overnight, but it will gradually climb. First to $5,000, then $8,000, then $12,000 over the next few years. As gold rises and Bitcoin soars to $1 million, what happens to the dollar? It's not pretty. When gold jumps from $2,800 to $20,000, That means the dollar has lost about 85% of its value in relation to gold. And if Bitcoin rises from $100,000 to $1 million, the dollar loses around 90% of its worth compared to Bitcoin. Most people don't think in terms of gold or Bitcoin. They think about the cost of their groceries and rent. But here's the kicker. Those prices are poised to skyrocket. When the dollar depreciates 85 to 90% in relation to hard assets, it can lose 50 to 70% of its value compared to everything else: food, energy, housing, you name it. Let's break this down with some real numbers. Imagine you have $100,000 in savings today. You might feel stable, not rich, but secure. Then the government revalues gold to $20,000 and Bitcoin to $1 million. Fast forward 3 years, and if inflation hits 20% annually, not the government's numbers, but the actual impact of rising prices, food prices double, gas prices double, and rent goes up by 60%. Your $100,000 in savings? It's only going to buy what $35,000 would have just 3 years earlier. You've effectively lost 65% of your purchasing power. Meanwhile, the government's debt stands at $37 trillion nominally. But after adjusting for the effects of inflation they've created, that debt is really worth only about $13 trillion. They've effectively wiped out $24 trillion in debt, not by paying it off, but by devaluing the currency it's denominated in. In doing so, they've taken $24 trillion from creditors, savers, and dollar holders, easing their own debt burden. This isn't just speculation. It's a strategy that's already underway. Take a look at recent developments. In December 2024, Senator Cynthia Lummis introduced the Bitcoin Act, proposing the U.S. acquire 1 million Bitcoins over the next 5 years to hold as a strategic reserve asset. This bill has garnered bipartisan support, with both Republicans and Democrats on board. Why? Because both sides understand that the debt is unmanageable and that devaluation is the path forward. Rather than cutting spending or raising taxes, they're opting to take from savers. This bill is foundational for the revaluation of Bitcoin. It's not just about adopting crypto. It's about alleviating debt through asset revaluation. Fast forward to January 2025, when President Trump signed an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. This order empowers the Treasury to acquire and hold Bitcoin, directing federal agencies to create policies promoting digital assets, reinforcing Bitcoin's role as a national security matter. This is where the rubber meets the road. The bill was simply the outline. The executive order is the decisive action. They are moving forward without waiting for congressional approval. They're on the move now, and there's been a growing buzz around the idea of returning to some form of gold-backed currency. Not a full gold standard, but more of a partial backing, where the dollar is backed by a certain percentage of gold reserves. At first glance, this may seem like a conservative and responsible approach to currency. However, let's break down what this really means. To back the dollar with gold at a price of $2,800 per ounce. That's just not feasible. There simply isn't enough gold available. With the M2 money supply sitting at $21 trillion and the U.S. holding approximately $731 billion in gold at current prices, that only results in a backing of about 3.5%. You can't credibly claim that the dollar is backed by gold, when its support is at such a low percentage. However, if the price of gold were to be revalued to $20,000 per ounce, suddenly the scenario changes. The U.S. would then have around $5.2 trillion in gold backing, translating to a substantial 25% support of the M2. This revaluation would allow for the narrative of returning to sound money, appealing to conservatives who advocate for a hard money system. Yet, in reality, this would mean a major revaluation of gold, multiplying its price by 7, and a devastating 85% reduction in the dollar's purchasing power. It's a sleight of hand, cleverly disguised as fiscal responsibility. Now, let's consider the international implications, as this isn't just a domestic issue. The U.S. requires buy-in from other nations, and they're gearing up for that too. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have long been discussing a gold-backed currency. They're growing weary of dollar supremacy and fed up with the U.S. printing money and inflating their economies. They want an alternative, and they have been stockpiling gold, thousands of tons of it. China officially claims 2,300 tons, but analysts suspect they hold between 4,000 and 6,000 tons unofficially. Russia has around 2,300 tons, and India has 840 tons, with plans to acquire more. These nations are preparing for a financial reset, accumulating the hard assets that will hold value when fiat currencies ultimately falter. Here's the crucial part. When the U.S. revalues gold at $20,000 an ounce, it won't just affect them. It will trigger a global repricing, as gold is a universally traded commodity. If the U.S. establishes gold at $20,000 while China values it at $18,000 and Russia at $22,000, the global price will stabilize somewhere within that spectrum. This would lead to a revaluation of everyone's gold reserves and a devaluation of global debts, a coordinated reset that, while not explicitly planned, aligns with the interests of every government grappling with overwhelming debt burdens. The U.S. seems to be setting the stage for this to unfold between 2026 and 2027. Here's a rough outline of what to expect. In 2025, during the accumulation phase, the U.S. will quietly acquire Bitcoin through asset seizures and strategic purchases, making no grand announcements about their totals or intent, but rather accumulating in secrecy. Meanwhile, they'll start to build a narrative around gold backing and the importance of strategic reserves. Then, in 2026, we enter the crisis phase, where the struggle over the debt ceiling intensifies. The U.S. government may face significant hurdles like potential default or shutdowns, putting pressure on the bond market, which will begin to show signs of stress. There's a sudden surge in yields, and confidence begins to falter. The unfolding crisis provides a cover for drastic measures that would typically be politically risky. During such turbulent times, governments often enact policies that would be unthinkable under normal circumstances. Looking ahead to 2027, we enter a phase of currency revaluation. The government announces the launch of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, claiming it holds 1 million Bitcoin. For the purposes of the balance sheet, they're assigning a value of $1 million per coin. At the same time, there's talk of returning to a gold-backed dollar, with gold being revalued to an astonishing $20,000 per ounce for reserve calculations. This move is touted as a means to stabilize the currency, restore confidence, and reinforce American financial dominance. Impressions that the public readily accepts because it sounds sound and responsible, in stark contrast to traditional money printing. But what's the reality behind these measures? In a span of about 12 to 18 months, Bitcoin could surge from $100,000 to $1 million, while gold might jump from $2,800 to $20,000. Meanwhile, the dollar suffers an alarming decline, losing 70% of its purchasing power. Inflation skyrockets, not just to 10% a year, but possibly to 30% or even 50% within the first year alone. Basic necessities see dramatic price increases, food costs triple, energy surges fourfold, and while housing prices double in nominal terms, they plummet in real terms as affordability vanishes. This situation spirals the economy into stagflation. High inflation coupled with low growth, pushing unemployment up to 8 to 10%. The middle class faces significant setbacks, but intriguingly, the debt is effectively wiped clean. $37 trillion in nominal values may only equate to $12 trillion in real value. Mission accomplished. The government weathered the storm, creditors take a hit, and savers are left with nothing. All of this wrapped up in legal frameworks and presented as necessary measures to sustain American financial strength. So, who benefits and who suffers? It's clear who the winners are. The U.S. government maneuvers its way to effectively erase $25 trillion in real debt burden without formal default. Politicians escape the political backlash of spending cuts or tax hikes, while the Federal Reserve retains its grip on the monetary system. Early Bitcoin adopters stand to gain tremendously. Those who invested at $30,000 might see returns skyrocket to $1 million. Gold investors, too, those who purchased at $800 and watch it climb to $20,000, stand to profit, provided they can weather the fluctuations. Foreign governments possessing gold reserves, China, Russia, India, also see the value of their holdings increase and can alleviate their debts via similar tactics. Wealthy individuals with assets, real estate, stocks, businesses, find their holdings inflate nominally, helping them retain their wealth through this tumultuous transition. On the flip side, the middle class suffers significantly. Those with savings in dollars, retirees relying on fixed incomes, see their purchasing power vanish. Bondholders and anyone retaining U.S. Treasuries will receive payments in devalued dollars, incurring a loss of 70% in real value. Pension funds heavily invested in government bonds face dire consequences as those bonds become effectively worthless in real terms, resulting in pension collapses while workers find their wages lagging woefully behind inflation. Real wages are facing a significant decline of 40 to 50%, leading to a collapse in living standards. Renters are feeling the pinch as landlords hike rents to keep pace with inflation, but wages aren't keeping up, resulting in many people being priced out. This has led to a surge in homelessness. Small businesses are struggling too. They can't increase prices quickly enough to cover their rising costs. Profit margins are shrinking, and business failures are on the rise. The so-called American dream seems to be fading away because the currency that defined that dream is losing its value. This isn't an exaggeration, it's a mathematical reality driven by current fiscal strategies. Historical instances show us that such patterns have repeated multiple times. Take Weimar Germany in the 1920s, for example. Faced with war reparations, the government resorted to printing money, leading to the collapse of the mark and hyperinflation that obliterated the middle class. The same occurred in Argentina across the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, where government defaults on debt resulted in devastating devaluations of the peso, evaporating savings while clearing the national debt. In Zimbabwe during the 2000s, rampant money printing to cover deficits rendered the Zimbabwe dollar nearly worthless, with citizens needing wheelbarrows of cash just to buy bread. Again, government debt was wiped clean. Venezuela experienced a similar fate in the 2010s, where hyperinflation ravaged the economy, but financial burdens on the government were minimized. This cycle remains consistent. When governments fall into crisis, they often devalue their currencies, leaving savers and creditors to bear the brunt of the losses, while the government emerges relatively unscathed. The United States appears to be following this same trajectory, albeit with more polished rhetoric. What they refer to as strategic reserve revaluation amounts to money printing, while gold-backed dollar restoration is nothing but currency debasement. Labels like necessary policy for preserving financial stability are nothing more than a smokescreen. In the end, the same result prevails. You lose, they gain. So, here's what you need to do, and you must act immediately. After the revaluation takes place, it will be too late to safeguard your assets. First, exit dollar-denominated assets. Bonds are a losing game. Government bonds, corporate bonds, anything in dollars will likely drop in real value by 70%. Sell them now. Cash is another risk. Keeping dollars in savings, checking accounts, or money markets will erode their value. Limit your cash to only what's essential for 3 months of expenses. Next, pivot towards hard assets. Invest in physical gold, not in ETFs or mining stocks, but in tangible gold you can hold, coins and bars stored securely. Gold has a proven track record as a reliable store of value over 5,000 years and will maintain purchasing power through economic resets. Consider Bitcoin as well. If you understand its technology and can secure your holdings, it serves as a digital equivalent to gold. While more volatile, it also offers greater potential for upside. The U.S. government is poised to revalue it to $1 million. Get involved before this occurs. Lastly, think about real estate. Seek out productive properties like farmland or rental units in robust markets. Avoid purely speculative ventures like vacation homes or risky flips. Invest instead in real estate that produces income. Also, consider commodities. Energy, agricultural products, and industrial metals are worthwhile options in the current climate. It's important to recognize that inflation is set to impact various assets over time. To hedge against this, consider using commodity-focused funds or even owning commodities directly, if that's feasible. Next, it's crucial to address personal debt. While it might seem logical to hold on to debt in a devaluing dollar scenario, after all, you'd be paying it back with cheaper currency. The reality is quite different. Your debt and income are both tied to the dollar. As the dollar loses value, your wages often lag behind inflation, meaning you're earning less in real terms. This paradox makes debt a more complex burden for individuals, as, unlike the government, you can't simply create money. You must earn it, and typically, wages don't keep up. Prioritize paying off high-interest debts such as credit cards, personal loans, and car loans. Mortgage debt can be more complicated. If you have a fixed-rate mortgage at a low interest rate, it's usually best to keep it, as inflation will diminish that debt over time. However, if your mortgage has a variable rate or a high fixed rate, it's wise to pay it off or refinance. Additionally, think about diversifying your investments internationally. It's not advisable to hold all your assets in US dollars. Consider opening accounts in foreign banks and investing in stable currencies like Swiss francs, Singapore dollars, or Norwegian krone. Delve into foreign real estate or stocks in companies that operate in currencies different from the dollar. This strategy protects you from being fully exposed when the dollar faces significant challenges. Investing in your skills and building a diverse network is also essential. In times of economic instability, your ability to produce, your expertise, and your relationships can become your greatest assets. This encompasses practical trades, healthcare knowledge, agricultural skills, and connections with people who have essential resources. When currencies fail, community resilience often outweighs the value of cash. Now, you might wonder if this approach sounds overly cautious or reminiscent of doomsday scenarios. I assure you, it's grounded in reality. The U.S. debt to GDP ratio currently sits at 132%, with annual interest payments reaching $1.2 trillion. This situation cannot be sustained through taxes or spending cuts alone. Historically, governments facing similar dilemmas have turned to currency devaluation as a solution. The U.S. has done this before, and it's likely to happen again. The key question is not if, but when, and the indicators point towards a potential timeline around 2026 to 2027. The groundwork is already being laid through executive orders and proposed legislation. This is not about conspiracy. It's about observable policy. It changes. You just need to pay attention. And here's the crucial evidence you need to consider. Central banks around the world are taking significant steps. They're purchasing gold at unprecedented levels. In 2022 and 2023 alone, central banks bought over 2,000 tons of gold, marking the highest amount since 1950. Why are they doing this? They recognize the impending changes. They're moving away from reliance on the dollar and bracing for a potential financial reset. China is strategically accumulating Bitcoin through its state-owned enterprises and mining efforts, positioning itself for the future. Russia, too, is adding to its gold reserves while minimizing dollar holdings. This is clearly a concerted effort. The BRICS nations are establishing alternative payment systems, laying the groundwork for a world not dominated by the dollar. These governments have access to intelligence, economic advisors, and vital insider information. They are all anticipating the same event: a dollar collapse and a monetary reset. If they are taking precautions, shouldn't you be doing the same? Let's revisit the timeline, as it is essential to understand. In 2025, we enter the accumulation phase when the U.S. may quietly acquire Bitcoin while the narrative around gold strengthens. This is your opportunity to start accumulating. Think gold and Bitcoin as hard assets. Move forward to 2026, when we could face a crisis phase marked by conflicts over the debt ceiling, stress in the bond market, and increased volatility. It's vital to remain steadfast and not panic in the face of fluctuations in prices. Don't sell your hard assets. By 2027, we reach a revaluation phase where Bitcoin could see a value of $1 million and gold might be revalued to $20,000, while the dollar collapses and inflation surges. Those who position themselves in 2025 will emerge intact. Those who didn't may face severe consequences. From 2028 to 2030, we enter a stabilization phase where new price levels could settle Bitcoin between $500,000 and $800,000 in gold, between $15,000 and $18,000. The dollar will stabilize, but at a new, reduced purchasing power. The reset will be complete. Those who invested in hard assets will have preserved their wealth, while those holding onto dollars may see a loss of 70%. The wealth gap will widen, and the middle class will shrink further. The pressing question now becomes, which side will you be on? What they won't tell you is that this reset is intentional. It's not a mistake or a market failure. It's a calculated policy choice aimed at eliminating debt by devaluing currency. They opt for this route because the alternative, default, would irreparably compromise their credibility. While devaluation erodes the wealth of the people, it maintains government power. Thus, they choose devaluation every time, and they are making that choice right now. The strategic accumulation of Bitcoin is not merely about innovation. It's about positioning a new asset class for future revaluation. The conversation around a gold-backed dollar isn't really about seeking sound money. It's about setting the stage for a gold revaluation. Each policy decision appears to aim for a reset. And if you don't act wisely, you might become collateral damage. Here's a straightforward action plan for you. Week 1. Start by opening a precious metals account and invest in physical gold. Aim for at least 1 ounce to begin with and adjust your purchases according to your net worth. The goal should be to allocate about 10 to 20% of your net worth into gold. Week 2. Next, open a Bitcoin account and purchase Bitcoin. If you can, start with at least $1,000 and then scale your investments depending on your risk tolerance. Try to have about 5 to 15% of your net worth in Bitcoin. Week 3, reassess your bond holdings. Sell any long-term government bonds and corporate bonds unless they are very short-term. Use the proceeds to invest in hard assets or short-term instruments. Week 4, take a hard look at your cash holdings. Consider keeping only 3 months' worth of expenses in cash and transfer any excess into hard assets. Make sure to retain only what you need for operational purposes. Month 2, it's time to think globally. Open a foreign bank account and research foreign real estate options. Look into diversifying your investments in international stocks. Month 3, focus on personal development and community building. Identify your valuable skills and connect with local networks. Think about acquiring rural property or access to land. This is your structured action plan, step by step, week by week. Don't hesitate. Time is of the essence. Lastly, let's address the moral aspect. Some of you might feel that this situation is unjust, and you're right. It feels like theft, albeit legal theft. But the harsh truth is that it's happening regardless of how you feel about it. You can choose to be outraged and end up financially ruined, or you can be aware and prepare yourself for what lies ahead. I'd prefer for you to persevere and have the chance to fight another day rather than lose everything while standing firm on principle. The government prioritizes its own survival, often at the expense of individuals, without a second thought. That's just how power operates. So, your options are clear. Adapt or face destruction, make smart moves and invest in hard assets. Preserve your wealth as we navigate this reset. Use that secured wealth to create something more promising on the other side, or simply hold on to your dollars. You can either believe the government's narrative and trust they're looking out for your interests, or you can watch your life savings diminish. I've made my choice, and it's clear which way the savvy investors are leaning. The real question is, what will you decide? If this perspective has shifted how you view the situation, don't go through it alone. Consider joining the channel membership for real-time updates on the reset as it unfolds. Please share this with anyone you know who has savings, retirement accounts, or trusts the dollar. They must be aware that the reset in 2027 is approaching. The U.S. government is employing Bitcoin and gold to mitigate $37 trillion in debt, and this will impact your purchasing power. Position yourself wisely while there's still time. The choice ultimately rests with you.